The West Midlands. One region, many futures. Home to the fastest growing cluster of tech companies in the UK.
West Midlands is a great place to be based.
We're the only region to have a 5G testbed. We're leading the way, we're innovative.
We've got a lot of development happening in sort of film and gaming and virtual production.
This is the place to embrace opportunities to test and develop the high-growth industries of the future.
We're investing in new state-of-the-art offices to be able to support our expansion.
We have the highest number of companies developing new tech outside of London: 5G, cybersecurity, digital transformation.
Whether it's your finances, your business plan, Steam House allows you access to all of that support.
There is a particular focus on the creative digital industry.
The West Midlands is home to 25% of the UK's game market output. Over 3,000 gaming development professionals with a bank of transferable skills.
Leamington is one of the big hubs for games development in the UK.
When we're recruiting, people see it as a really attractive place to come and live.
Our central location and cost-effective real estate are a winning combination for businesses requiring a strategic hub location away from the costly capital. The workforce is highly skilled. 51,000 tech professionals are based within 45 minutes of central Birmingham.
Our business is all about people. We need people with the right skills. That way, West Midland was a perfect fit for us.
And every year, our universities, with 50 tech-related centres of excellence, add to the talent pool.
We're able to work with the product design courses, the human-computer interaction courses and psychology courses to help mentor students.
This is where you'll find opportunities to develop a whole range of cutting-edge technologies, such as low-carbon tech, data-driven healthcare, smart cities, and critical infrastructure cybersecurity.
The complete diversity of thought, diversity of opportunity that is available here is holding young people here.
People have different skills, and those complementary skills can create something really, really wonderful.
We're a place that thrives on new ways of doing things, a region that's looking to the future.
It worked for us. I'm sure it will work for you guys.
One, and we've got an absolutely fantastic panel here today to discuss some really important topics. Slido, we're using Slido today, but we're focusing on the discussion of the panel, but I'm really, really interested in getting your reflections, your views, your questions that we can take away as a panel we can consider. So please do use Slido for that purpose, but apologies if we don't get time to get around to the questions. We'll see how we get on. Just by way of introduction, I just want to say, just a little bit about the topic. I think every single one of us, all of us, we all rely on the functions of the public sector and government every single day. And this ranges from the services that we use as citizens all the way through to the defence and national security functions that keep us all safe. And the public sector in the UK is huge. It's about 45% of GDP. It's incredibly complex. It's subject to a diversity of cyber threats that we've been hearing lots about over the last couple of days, from ransomware all the way through to sophisticated nation-state attacks. And the government cybersecurity strategy it recognises the cyber resilience challenge that brings. It sets out the need for a joined up response where our response is more than the sum of its parts, if you will. In other words, defend as one. And this whole imperative to defend together as one becomes ever more acute as we see the threat advance, especially some of the development of that threat from China that we've been hearing about. And so today, I'm really excited to introduce an absolutely fantastic panel who's going to give some amazing insight into Defend as One, about how we work across organisational boundaries, about how we work together, share capability to help us to rise some of that to some of that challenge. So to kick off, I'd just like to introduce the panel. First of all, I have Bella Powell, who's the Director of Cyber in the Government Security Group, GSG, part of Cabinet Office. Stuart Frost, the Head of Enterprise Security and Risk Management in the Department of Work and Pensions, DWP. We have Jason Corbishley, the Chief Information Security Officer in the Police Digital Service, and Mike Fell, the Executive Director for National Cyber Operations within NHS England. Thank you, panel, for joining us today. So perhaps if I can just open up the panel, Bella, with you, and just ask a really open question. What does Defend as One mean to you?
Thanks, Ian. You mentioned earlier that the concept of Defend as One is one of the two pillars in the government cybersecurity strategy, and it's a deliberately broad phrase. But I love the fact that if you look across government and public sector now, that phrase is also becoming a bit of a banner under which we all march, under which all of the work that we're doing together fits. And I think that's really fantastic to see. That's really, really powerful. What it means in practice, I think I would pick out three things. So the first is our ability to take coordinated and concerted action, particularly in response to incidents, threats and vulnerabilities. Government is fantastic at operating in silos, and we need to get much better at breaking down those silos and operating in a much more kind of concerted fashion, particularly when we see a really significant incident or threat. The second thing is really about getting the right level of visibility of our risk picture, both an aggregate level across government and then also at an organisation level. And what that means in practice is we need to get much more data-driven. We need to get much better at sharing data, understanding what that means to us from a government perspective, and then acting on that really, really decisively again. And then I think the final thing is that we need to get much better at collaboration, and that's kind of collaboration in a number of different senses. Collaborating to make sure that we're getting the right level of diversity of thought when we're tackling the really difficult challenges that we have to face so that we come up with the most innovative and the best possible outcomes. But also collaborating to kind of build skills, build capability, and as you mentioned earlier, to make sure that we're more than the sum of our parts. So I think that's also really, really important. And the kind of the primary focus for us over the last 18 months to 2 years in that kind of Defend as One objective has been establishing the Government Cyber Coordination Centre. I know well, in fact, the entirety of this panel knows lots about the Government Cyber Coordination Centre, or GC3. So I'll just say a couple of quick words about it. So GC3 was soft launched in September of last year. It's a joint initiative between NCSC, CDDO and Government Security Group. And think of it as it's a capability that is built for network defenders, by network defenders, to help us to respond much more effectively to threats, vulnerabilities and incidents across government. And that's been delivered in a really challenging environment. But it's already starting to deliver benefit, and Cyber UK has actually been a brilliant opportunity to hear from people across government of the sort of the types of value that they're getting from that model, which has been really, really fantastic to see. So big shout out to everyone who's been involved in that so far. I'm really proud of that work. I think the team has done a fabulous job.
Yeah, here. I mean, they really have, haven't they, Bella? Thank you for that. And Stuart, I mean, DWP, one of the departments that's contributing to, and certainly, I would hope would benefit from GC3. What's your view? How would you like to see the GC3 to develop as a community over the next year?
I think it's been an excellent start, Ian. As Bella says, it was a soft launch, and what we're not great at in the civil service is launching things before they're quite ready. It's okay to iterate, it's okay to change, it's okay to fail, and it's okay to learn lessons, and we need to do more of that. GC3 is focused on incident response. If we actually want to achieve the vision, then Defend is about resisting attack in the first place. And to do that, we need to really stop talking about the collaboration across government and actually get on and do this. And that means sharing intelligence, sharing knowledge, sharing capability, problems, weaknesses, solutions and insights. And that's easier said than done, because whilst it's easy to share positive news, humans aren't wired to share negative news. We don't react well to negative news, to bad news. But unless we share our weaknesses and share our risks, we aren't going to achieve that vision of actually defending as one and protecting the organisations from danger in the first instance. So, great start, great to see the collaboration. I think now probably time out and let's take that next all-important step to defend as one.
Brilliant. No, I mean that's great advice, Stuart. Very much agree with that. I mean, one of the things about Defend as One, it's not something that's entirely new in the government cybersecurity strategy. It's also part of the cyber strategy for health and social care, Mike. So when we think about the NHS, it's often described as one of the world's largest organisations, but I think there's a reality, isn't there, that it's actually many thousands of organisations that come together almost sort of like under one brand. Mike, what have you learnt about bringing together that community, particularly in cyber defence across the NHS, to enable Defend as One in your context?
Yeah, so there's around 150,000 organisations that contribute and make up what we would recognise as the National Health Service. And the term Defend as One has been super helpful, actually, in the way that we approach security within it. And some of the reasons for that, Bella touched on that. There's this strategic ambiguity in the phrase Defend as One. And if I were to characterise it as a friend, it's a very amenable friend. It's very tolerant of it's not going to push back. It's going to allow you to put on it what you wish. And in an organisation that, an ecosystem of such scale as the NHS, it needs to have that because we need a unified response in a disaggregated sector. The health service delivers 750,000 GPs appointments every day and responds to 80,000 calls to ambulances. There's a lot of different kind of use cases that are in there that we need to protect and defend against and understand what we need to most protect. And again, that kind of banner that links directly to the national strategy has been really powerful in teasing that out. So it's that unified response. It's being able to be clear about where we will deliver national services because philosophically they are the right way of doing something for reasons of cost or of limited resource or of intelligent sharing. But also the bit that we probably don't speak enough to is in being clear about where we don't defend once, but we defend as one, i.e. where is risk locally owned, which is massively important in such a complex system.
Right, thank you. And I mean, and some of those statistics are quite incredible. 150,000 organisations. I believe there's something like 1.5 million endpoints as well, which is another, quite amazing statistic. And you've worked really hard across the NHS to gain a sort of a unified view across those 1.5 million endpoints. I'd really be interested in some views about, what has that enabled you to discover? What challenges have there been bringing together that view? And, has it delivered any sort of particular efficiencies that you could share with us?
Yeah, so we're up to 1.8 million that are visible now.
Oh, wow.
I think the main lesson of that is it's hard, right? I speak with colleagues in local government, I speak with colleagues in other sectors, and it is hard, but it is part of getting that unified view. I think the lessons from it are focusing on the foundations. So by providing a national service, we are able to rapidly support a whole range of organisations with those devices. But it also allows us the insight to focus where local solutions are needed, which is really important because you can't deliver everything nationally. The second bit is the insight as well, as we start thinking about the incidents, the 4,000 incidents that the team deal with every year as a result of that visibility, and the 6 ransomware near-miss incidents we've had in the last 9 months where we've had to deploy cyber incident teams and have come very close to entire hospitals losing their IT. And the lessons from that, frustratingly, as we've heard in many other sessions, are incredibly foundational in many cases, the absence of multi-factor authentication. So whilst it's important that we focus and celebrate that kind of unified view, it's the intelligence that comes out of it and being vocal and transparent about those lessons that we get through that single visibility.
That's brilliant. No, thank you. And Jason, I mean, from a policing point of view, you've been integral to the formation of the National Management Centre, the NMC, across policing. Are there any particular key lessons from your experience there that you could share with others that might be considering similar models?
Yeah, so the policing journey started way back in 2016. So you know, we're well into the sort of learning and developing from where we set off. And where we started that journey was very much around a technical requirement that, you know, we need to have a SOC, we need to start to think about how we might generate a better view of the situational awareness across the sector. But actually over that period of time, we've shifted that language away from it being a technical requirement to one of what's the business impact, what does it mean from a risk treatment, and ultimately start to use operational terms such as threat, harm and risk. And that started to allow us to drive a different agenda around, you know, the next phase of steps from delivering a technical solution right through to what is the impact should an incident occur, and actually how will we manage that incident, and what is the set of recovery processes that we would undertake. You know, and defending as one, yeah, absolutely, the ambiguity does help, but actually it's helped us start to bring the sector together. And now we've got the next challenge, which is how do we take that to the next step and integrate it into the wider set of government objectives.
And you know, you're starting to talk there about, you know, how you understand risk across, you know, across policing, you know, with some of those attributes there, Jason. I mean, I believe you've been integrating cyber operations with the risk management approach across, you know, policing. So are there any lessons that you've been learning from how policing manages cyber risk?
Yeah, so we've been moving away from, you know, that standard of we'll issue intelligence, we'll identify IOCs, we'll publish those, we'll collate and collect a position to one of what's the actual business impact. How do we start to create a risk balance case? What does it mean in terms of the impact to operational services? So instead of it being perceived to be we've got this cyber incident and it's a technical issue, so can the techies go away and start to look at a form of resolution? It's one around what is the impact to whatever those services are, whether it be core emergency services directly to citizens, or indeed crime prevention, or indeed investigation services. So contextualisation is really important, and as we move into that interlink with wider government Defenders One, it's really important that we develop that mutual respect for being able to take information and apply a local or a sector context to it, because for the centre to understand everything, I think, is an ambition that will never be achieved. But we therefore need to build that sort of respect, but also trust in each of our roles so that we can share effectively, but at the same time move to a respond, recover, and ultimately then back to how we protect the environment and actually try and reduce the number of incidents and response that we need to deal with.
No, absolutely. And you know, as we consider, you know, risk, increasingly it's not, you know, you can't consider it within an organisational silo, because, you know, we are also interconnected in terms of, you know, what we do in the services that we run and so on. So I'm really interested, Bella, in your views on like how consistent is our approach to management of cyber risk across government? What can departments do to ensure that we're managing risk appropriately and consistently?
I mean, it's really great to hear Jason's views on how that's being managed within policing, and I think taking lessons from that is really, really important. I mean, risk is tricky, and I think certainly across the public sector at the moment we're not managing it well. We're not managing cyber risk well. I think the thing that we really need to achieve is we need to change the kind of the way that we manage the risk calculus, the way that we talk about cyber risk, if we want to kind of achieve the outcomes that we need to. And I think exactly as you described, Jason, those are really, really important steps to achieving that. I think from my perspective, the biggest, or one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is how do we measure and articulate the levels of resilience that we need to achieve across organisations. That's a, you know, a kind of a really foundational step. And actually I think we're making some really good progress there across public sector, but also within central government as part of the GovAssure scheme that we've rolled out. So GovAssure gives us a much more objective, outcome-based and holistic view of the levels of resilience that we need organisations to achieve, but also the levels they are achieving. And I think that is really, really powerful in articulating where we are and what the sort of the overarching landscape looks like. But even if you get to resilience, the kind of the next step on from that is, well, what does that mean in terms of risk? And actually I think we're still, despite, you know, some really great examples, we're still struggling to quantify objectively the impact and the likelihood of incidents across government, particularly when you look at the kind of the aggregate level of risk. I think that is still a really, really challenging issue, and we need to get much better data sets, much better visibility of incidents in order to achieve that, which is why I think the work of GC3 is going to be really, really valuable in that space. And I think there's a kind of final point, which is that we need to get much better at creating an environment and a culture at all levels of organisations where we are thinking about cyber risk as just another one of several business risks that are factored into decision making. At the moment, there's quite a strong misconception in many organisations and for many leaders that you need to be a deep technical expert to be able to make a decision on a cyber risk or a sort of a cyber investment, and that's fundamentally false. We need to make sure that we're articulating cyber risk more effectively for those leaders, but they need to be considering cyber risk as one of the many things they are factoring into their broader decision making. And I think if we can achieve that and we can create that culture at all levels of departments and broader organisations in public sector, we'll be able to make sure we're sort of dealing with that risk calculus effectively, and we're truly taking into account cyber risk in our decision making.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that, Bella. And particularly, I think that sort of that the relation to cyber risk to the actual organisational priorities is really important. So it's not treated within isolation. Mike, I mean, across the NHS, I mean, there's a lot of experience of managing operational level risk, operational cyber risk, but also linking that to national scale strategic risk. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, and what lessons might there be for government more broadly in some of the approach that health care takes.
So I think the key lesson here is we talk to a cyber risk, and I think earlier sessions over the conference have talked to cyber as a vector, but actually viewing it in my language through a clinical risk and presenting this as a patient safety issue. More generally, putting the cyber risk in the context of a business risk is at the heart of this. We increasingly are effective at events like this of talking within our own communities and making progress on what the right controls are, what the right way of articulating risk. But ultimately, with the incidents, when I look back about significant incidents across the health sector in the time that I've been in post, typically we see the early hours of the incident with an ambiguity phase about, has a supplier been popped? Is it an IT outage? Is it a cyber incident? That's kind of endemic across all of our kind of experiences, I'd expect. You then go into a second phase where there's a real kind of cyber bit once you know that you're dealing with a cyber incident, where the playbooks kick in, the technical experts get on top of it. But actually very rapidly in all of the incidents that we've seen in healthcare providers, suppliers, and in hospitals, within days, you're immediately, if not less, you're into a business continuity situation where people are having to make hard calls about the provision of care, the services that do that, and actually the cyber bit becomes almost irrelevant. So I think the key takeaway from me in that, and the reflection is there, of really kind of continuing to drill down on that business understanding, whatever our business is, and helping our partners, our other leaders, in recognising what cyber brings as a response capability, but where the ownership is also, and the decisions need to be made by business owners.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really powerful in healthcare, isn't it? And I think it's really important for us to learn some lessons there about making sure that when we are talking cybersecurity, that is related to those those outcomes that ultimately are really important for our organisations. Thank you. One of the areas I'd like to turn to next is supply chain security. And supply chain is, it's difficult, and we see a significant number of cyber attacks that emanate within the supply chain. It's something that all of us are having to contend with. And I wonder, Stuart, if I could ask you maybe to give some views about what steps DWP are taking to capture risk in their supply chain, and lessons that we can take from your experiences and apply to that sort of that Defenders One philosophy that we're talking about today.
Yeah, just for 1 second before I do, I just want to come back to this cyber business risk here, because this is absolutely critical. Business risk is defined as the factors that may expose an organisation to harm. That could be security related.
Of course.
So absolutely it's business risk, and we've got to become better at reverse engineering business language into security risk. So when we articulate a risk, it is absolutely crystal clear on what the impact of that risk is should it be exploited. And for me, that's, can we pay benefits and can we get people into work? And that's what we've got to be clear on. But from a supply chain perspective, your supply chain should really now be part of your secure environment. That's the environment we create, really, so that the business can operate in an uninterrupted way. We've got a reasonably secure supply chain assurance function, split between pre- and post-contract. We have tiers of suppliers, gold, silver and bronze. Our gold suppliers are our business critical ones. If they fail, we may fail. They take our attention first. We look to see what controls they have in place that meet the standards that we operate to in DWP. And if they don't have controls in place, that's where that risk lens comes back in. Every contract is now risk assessed at point of contract award. And I think the key point here is very few contracts are awarded on the basis of security alone. There's business reasons, there's commercial reasons, there's legal reasons. Everybody has to come to the table here. And that's the key thing here. Everybody has to be part of this. And from a security perspective, we kind of need to divorce ourselves on whether the risk is high or low. What's important is we effect due diligence in the risk management, in the analysis of the risk, so the risk owner can make an informed decision rather than a decision when they are deciding whether to pursue that contract or not. We then have post-contract, we review at 3 months, because people are great at saying we'll put X, Y and Z in place if we get this contract. They don't always do it. So we do it at 3 months and we do it at 12 months. And that's called in-life assurance, in-life risk management. An assurance goes underneath the compliance to see if everything possible that can be done to protect those assets has in fact been done. It provides a level of certainty through triangulated evidence, because people sometimes think they're compliant, they're not, because humans are fallible and sometimes we're compliant with the wrong thing. Despite all that, the problem there is we're actually defending as DWP.
Yeah.
We're not defending as one. So there is work to be done cross-government in how we can build and share that knowledge, that expertise. Because I'm sure there's other equally good parts of government that are doing something similar. I will go out and assure supplier X, then Ministry of Justice, Home Office, MOD will go out and duplicate the work we've done. If we've got an assurance statement that says X organisation is meeting the government minimum security standards, that information is useful information for other departments to use if it's up to date and relevant. We're also buying the same software. We're all buying similar software in isolation. We should be looking at having federated models and departmental-based compartments of that software.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think for all of us, we're all trying to grapple with that supply chain problem. We're always, you suggest there, Stuart, using the same sort of vendors and software. And I just wonder actually before we move on to the next question whether any other panel members have got any views that they'd like to contribute on that, because it's something that impacts all of us.
Yeah, so certainly across the policing sector, we see a growing challenge across that supply chain. And, fundamentally, we need to move on from the simplistic position of the minimum set of requirements that need to be answered yes or no, or indeed provide a written response within a more formal tender position. G-Cloud's a huge issue for me and a huge issue for my wider team. It's a quick way to procure a service, but actually you get the service that you buy from that framework. We can't continue to operate and protect against the growing threats that we've heard about over the last 2 days, and keep just taking the easy option to buy the thing that we need and then spend a load of money and a load of time trying to reverse engineer and then build in capabilities that should have been built in from the outset. And therefore there's a question around expectation for me, particularly from organisational leaders, around a realism around the provision of funding to the delivery of an outcome. And actually what's more important, the delivery of the outcome, or indeed the delivery of the outcome with necessary and proportionate set of controls built into it.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Could I just add one more thing from NCSC's own breach survey that was published last month? In 2023, there was a figure in that breach survey about the number of organisations that had reviewed the risks of their first tier suppliers, and it was 13%. In this year's survey, that's gone down to 11%. And that's something we really need to focus on. And that's before we go into tier 3, 4, 5, 6. We need to start somewhere and take some baby steps to look at our critical first tier suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that survey is the one I believe with DCET. But it's absolutely, those sort of statistics are quite troublesome, aren't they? But it strikes me that there is a real opportunity for us here as a community to be much more efficient, to influence and to encourage information transparency. So, Bella, we've spoken about some quite difficult subjects here today, and we're making progress on some of them, but we've still got a lot of work to do quite clearly. It's clear we need a greater number and a more diverse set of skilled people to be able to accelerate some of this work and to achieve the aim. So, what are we doing? How can departments best build some of those essential skills that we need?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question, and every conversation we have with departments at the moment starts with we don't have the right level of skills to be able to deliver what we need to deliver. It's a very challenging environment, and this is the context of a global shortage of cyber and tech skills and a UK shortage of cyber and tech skills. So we're operating in a really difficult environment. But to your point, I think actually there are some quite significant opportunities for us within government. So if you look at us, so government and public sector as an employer, we are, I don't have the statistics, but we are going to be the biggest employer of cyber skills across the country. And if we can go back to the kind of the principles of defending as one, if we can act in a concerted fashion, if we can act as a single employer, actually that's enormously powerful. So we have a real opportunity to be able to describe the types of careers that can operate across the public sector and across government, which is a really, really kind of fantastic set of opportunities. But also we can make sure that we are making sure that we're tapping into the most diverse pools of talent we can. And there's a particularly interesting kind of thread in that opportunity for me, that if we can impact the level of diversity in the cyber profession in government, that will have a really material impact on the national level of diversity across the profession. So we can make the profession better, we can make it more representative. So particularly for government, that's, I think, a really, really critical thing. But also we can bring a much broader range of individuals into a really fantastic career path, which I think is, it's a fantastic opportunity. And there are some really brilliant examples if you look across departments where departments are already taking action to do that, and where we need to build on that kind of action to kind of take put in place a central model. So DWP, DEFRA, Ministry of Defence, apparently you have to have a D for this particular model, but the academies that we see within those departments are a really fantastic example of how bringing people from a very broad and diverse range of backgrounds, characteristics, disciplines creates a really fantastic set of skills. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity, I think, for us to build on the work that's already being done across departments to kind of tackle the scale of this problem. And I think the sort of the final point I'd raise is we often, I think, still jump to specific qualifications and specific requirements. And if we have a sort of a challenging cyber issue, it's got to be a security architect that's going to solve the problem for us. We need to get better at recognising that it takes a real breadth of skills and capabilities to be able to solve cyber challenges. We need to get better at kind of recognising what those, what those core skills are, and quite what kind of a team we need to be able to deliver on this. And it's not just a bunch of security architects. We do need those too, but it's a full team exercise.
No, absolutely, and I very much agree. Whilst we absolutely do need those security experts, but we also need to be thinking about security skills within other disciplines, security skills within procurement. We've just been talking about supply chain within our legal teams, within a whole range of other disciplines as well. That's some really insightful comments there in terms of what some of the departments in government do. And I just wondered, Jason, how are we addressing the skills issue within police digital?
So we've been fairly lucky today in that we've taken an approach that we're sort of geolocated, so we're not competing with a single location in terms of our sort of resource pool. So we've focused more on identifying the right skills and the right people, and not necessarily worrying too much about where they live. And that's primarily because policing's right across the UK, and we have links directly into every single police force. Where we have our National Management Centre as a fixed location, we work very much on the side of sort of innovation, linking in with operational policing, and therefore it brings a slightly different context to working in a security operations centre where you're just dealing with input and output from multiple sets of organisations. So we try to make it real, interesting, dynamic, but also give the teams the ability to really utilise the innovation that exists within themselves as a team, but also across all of the different policing organisations. And then how do we channel that to keep the roles that everybody's in interesting and dynamic. In terms of wider sets of apprenticeships and building those skills out and a team for the future, we're continuously looking at all the options that are available, but primarily it's about making increasing the awareness of what the NMC and what cyber services is doing on behalf of policing, but then also identifying the right skills and the right people to bring in and create that team that we have.
No, that's brilliant. No, thank you, Jason. All right, well, I think we've got time for a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions that, sort of really interesting ones coming through. I want to pick the top one. Probably, I'll sort of like start with you, Bella, but I'm really interested in other panel views on this as well, which is about cyber budgets are often deprioritised within government departments. So should we be considering some sort of like a fund as one type initiative which enables us to direct that funding a bit better?
I mean, obvious answer to that is yes, of course, as long as you give me the keys to that fund and I'm allowed to distribute it. That's the that is my very honest answer. So thinking about it a little bit more seriously, we're operating in a really, really challenging fiscal environment at the moment, and there's a really clear responsibility for government and for government organisations to operate more efficiently and to figure out how we can do things more effectively. So whether that's with central capability, whether that's kind of delegated out to departments to do that in a more efficient way. And actually, I think there is a really interesting value for money argument. And this goes for kind of broader delivery of digital transformation, not just cybersecurity. A value for money argument in thinking about where we can do things once and well centrally, where we can fund things once and well centrally, how we can kind of support departments in prioritising funding most effectively, and kind of use that as a real lever to achieve value for money and to achieve greater efficiency across government. I think if you look at colleagues who are sort of dealing with really complex public sectors, I think there are some really brilliant examples already where taking careful and quite philosophical, as you were saying earlier, Mike, decisions about what makes most sense to be done centrally, what you can achieve with sort of common technology and rolling out single platforms across a large number of organisations, and doing that in a way that achieves efficiency, achieves value for money, but also achieves some of our broader targets. So things like, greater visibility of risk, better ability to act in a concerted fashion across a large number of organisations. So I think there's definitely merit in that kind of concept of centralisation, and funding is absolutely part of that. But I think we need to think quite carefully about what makes sense to kind of be a sort of central capability, and what makes sense and what always needs to sit within an organisation.
Yeah. Thank you. Is anyone else? Mike?
Yeah, if I can come in and do the kind of almost staged contentious point here with it. So recognising the points there about what it makes sense to do once nationally. I'd like to make the case actually that central funding is part of the problem rather than the solution. And I like a good metaphor. So my metaphor here is we're walking down the streets kind of years after strategies have set out what we want to do here, and we're still getting wet feet. And when I look back, what we've done is, certainly in the health sector, we've invested in a really good cyber umbrella. We've put in a national security operations centre. We've aligned with the government strategy. We've got awareness campaigns. We've got the whole kind of holistic bit that's that big umbrella. And yet we're still going, my socks are wet. And when I look at the answer to that, I'm really kind of excited about the announcement that was made recently for health about £3.4 billion of investment in the spring budget to make the NHS more productive. Because that's about fixing the shoe leather in all the various organisations. And rather than saying that we've got the answer nationally and we're going to direct where that's spent, it's going to empower the local organisations, the hospitals, the trusts, the integrated care boards, to fix their broken IT, the VPN solutions that don't have MFA on, the out-of-support computers that are hosting the data that's getting breached, and actually push the risk to them to do. And I think the answer to that has to be locally funded for them to locally manage those risks. So that was the kind of contentious bit with that. I think the shoe leathers is very much locally. I think the umbrella's nationally.
Yeah, I love the analogy about the holes in your shoes.
Yeah, so in policing, we've sort of started on that journey, but fundamental to solving the funding position is about building trust and confidence across the organisations that make up your sector. So back in 2016, right through to probably even last year, the biggest, or the question that I was asked the most was, what's the value for money that I'm getting? What am I getting for the budget that you have been provided, etc. Now it's all about actually we can see the results-driven, data-driven outcomes that you're delivering as a team. And as a consequence to that, we've seen an increase in funding provided to cyber services through the funding process of the Home Office. So by building trust and confidence, you can start to deliver outcomes that are tangible for organisations, which then removes that question of, well, what am I getting for the money that you're being provided? But I agree with Mike. I think if we put it into the centre, you would be inundated with show us value for money, what's the benefit realisation? But I think it's more important around, you know, what is measured is done. And if we can have a more focus on measuring and what we're doing versus what we're spending, then we can be more meaningful around how we track progress against the strategic objectives that we've been talking about over the last 2 days.
Well, thank you.
Just a final observation, if I may, Ian. Security is always seen as expensive until you have a breach in an organisation. If we got risk correct, and I don't just mean in security, I mean by accountable business risk owners at board level, if we get governance correct, your risk should drive your funding allocation. It should drive your resource allocation. Risk is not driving business decisions.
Yes,
and that's the part we have to change.
Well, thank you. No, thanks for that. I mean, it was a great question. It certainly sparked some really good debate. There's one question at the top of the list that I really want to just like pick up actually, because I think it's really interesting. It's really important. And are there any lessons we can take from our international partners on how better to defend as one? I mean, and there's a resounding yes, actually. And we are learning from our international partners. We are collaborating with our international partners. There is tons more we can do with them. But, you know, I want to give, you know, a massive shout out to, you know, particularly our Five Eyes international partners. But, you know, but beyond, I mean, for example, you know, the work that we're doing with the Canadians, you know, particularly on data-driven cyber defence is, you know, is fantastic. And they've got, you know, some amazing capabilities. Our development of some of our active cyber defence measures like host base is based, you know, really heavily on some of their great work. So, like, you know, fantastic stuff. We do a lot of joint sealed guidance with our Five Eyes partners, and my reflection is, you know, when we do it jointly together, it's infinitely more powerful than when we do it alone. So, you know, that defend as one, I think it does expand, you know, it does expand out, you know, beyond just, you know, UK public sector, and absolutely includes our international partners. But I know this is something, you know, that certainly a number of the panel members are, you know, are having conversations with those same partners and learning lessons. So I just wonder, you know, very briefly in the couple of minutes we've got, if there's any sort of key panel reflections on lessons from the Five Eyes.
I'm really happy to jump in on that one. I mean, definitely, I think Five Eyes is a fantastic kind of set of nations to learn from, and I completely agree with you, particularly if you look at kind of data-driven cyber, the types of kind of centralised services in vulnerability scanning that you know, our colleagues in Australia and Canada and now also New Zealand are kind of thinking about developing. That is incredibly powerful, and I think we have an awful lot to learn as a nation from what some of our broader partners are doing. I think there's also, you know, we definitely need to kind of cast the net wider in terms of where we learn our lessons from. We've had some really fabulous conversations over the past few days from, for example, colleagues from Estonia, so that an entirely digital economy, that's an example of what we could be, where we might be in the future, and you know the kind of the types of approaches that are taken there are building, you know, levels of redundancy on redundancy on redundancy, because you know the digital stuff, the computers, the whatever you want to call it, they have to work. And I think we're sort of in this bizarre position at the moment where, you know, a vulnerability is discovered, and you know, half of our technology is not vulnerable to it because we're using older versions, which are just not, which are not impacted, which is insane. We've got you know, kind of really critical processes that can fall back to paper if they need to, because we still have the paper processes. If we should be thinking, I think, about a much more kind of radical view of what would happen if we kind of got to that end state of a sort of truly digital economy, and start thinking about how we would how we would design and how we would manage to achieve that kind of outcome, as opposed to kind of continuing to sort of fix the hole in the shoe leather that we have at the moment in widespread scale across the UK.
Yeah, I think that's good around that analogy, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else before we finish up on discussion?
I think the only observation I would have is that when we talk about Defenders 1, we tend to focus on the sort of identify, respond and recover. And if we're truly going to start to address the overall position of being able to defend through supply chain, through the delivery of capability, to achieve what Bella's just said there, then we've got to move this to the left, and we've got to start thinking around, well, in that protect space, what are the component elements that are needed? And Defenders 1, whilst really important, then becomes less important, because in theory we should see a reduction in the level of incidents that we're currently seeing increase in at this moment in time.
Brilliant. No, thank you so much. Right. Well, I've been told that that's all the time that we've got for the panel. But I mean, it's clear that the cyber challenge is not getting any easier, but working together really does give us a massive opportunity to address some of the risks and some of the threats that we face. We've had fantastic insight, I think, from the panel today across a number of domains, different parts of the public sector. There's some awesome work going on across the public sector, but also just want to acknowledge there's also awesome work going across the private sector as well, so there's definitely some lessons there for us. But for now, I'd just like to thank every single one of you for attending, for the great questions, but most importantly, I'd like to thank the panel for their amazing insight. Thanks.